So for those of you who are just joining us today, which is nobody in this room, but on Zoom a little bit, this is just kind of a quick and dirty introduction to Reconstructionist thinking about God. But for those of you who've been in the Adult B'nai Mitzvah class, just to, so we know why we're doing this, since we're going to be starting, late summer, early fall, when we resume after the summer with starting to look at the structure of the prayer service and learning different prayers, that will be part of the B'nai Mitzvah service and talking about prayer and so forth. But most Jewish prayer involves engaging with God, and some of that what they tend to is one of the first or second or third word of most Jewish prayers. So we thought to kind of start with having this kind of mini survey of theology to expose us to some different ways that Jews have thought about God, to kind of give us something of a shared language and exposure, and hopefully some new ideas, and just stimulate our own thinking in not the next section. So in a month from now, Rabbi Daria is going to lead our last session on June 19th, where she'll kind of help lead you all in a process of beginning to articulate your own theologies, not as like a final statement that you will live with until the day you leave this world, but as starting to synthesize things. And as we mentioned in the beginning, we'll also work on next year our spiritual autobiographies, right, of kind of our Jewish journeys of sorts, our spiritual journeys, and theological reflection will be part of that. So this is all kind of building into that. So we're jumping from the rabbis, the early rabbis of the Talmud and so forth that we were at last time, about 1,500 years into the future, squarely into the modern period, into Reconstructionism. So I'm going to say a little bit to set things up, and then we'll spend most of the time looking at some different writings. So first of all, it's actually kind of strange to just jump in with theology in the context of talking about Reconstructionism. And why is that? Because Reconstructionism, you may have heard this, it's kind of a bumper sticker that you'll see in maybe some other movements, but we kind of corner the market on it, where we'll talk about the 3 B's. Anyone know the 3 B's that are thrown out in Reconstructionism? Belonging, behaving, and believing. And like all kind of bumper stickery slogan type things, it's a great oversimplification, but there's wonderful ideas embedded within it. In that, in Reconstructionism, we kind of we don't like have people walk in and hit them with the nature of God. like that's not what Reconstructionism is about. The first step is really just belonging, is engaging with being part of the Jewish people, engaging with with being in Jewish community, and kind of feeling yourself a part of that flow, or we'll talk about the whole flow of Jewish civilization, right, which includes religion, but is not just religion. And then then you start behaving. Like this is part of the idea with having starting off with a B'nai Mitzvah, Adult B'nai Mitzvah, of having you guys start off consciously thinking about what Jewish behaviors are you taking on. Like that's the idea of the mitzvot that we were choosing from, right? That there's a kind of learning that comes from just the doing before the thinking. And then the last in the series is believing, And my teacher, Rabbi Jacob Staub, talked about I saw a written up talk that he gave about these three B's of like, if you think about how an infant is acculturated, right? When you bring a baby into the world, pretty much any culture, like first they're part of a community, they're part of a people, and then a family, right? And then they start doing stuff, and then only later as they grow, they start to create their own ideas and so forth. But first it's kind of belonging, and if it mirrors that pattern. So that's kind of the caveat of like that in it's important to name, and in Reconstructionism we don't lead with believing in God and so forth. But it's not as though that's not an important part of things. So we're gonna start and mostly center ourselves around the ideas of Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism, and the first major Reconstructionist thinker, but who really he's really in many people's reckoning, he's a major 20th century Jewish thinker. Quite a number of people argue he is the most important 20th century Jewish thinker. American, sometimes I think people even make it like, including the rest of the world. But one of the challenges about Kaplan is he had a very long career. He was born in 1881. He died in 1983. He was an old guy. He lived a vast, highly eventful stretch of Jewish history, right? That he grew up in very traditional Orthodoxy. He was even an Orthodox rabbi for a congregation for a good part of his early career. He lived through the Holocaust, State of Israel, the building of the Reconstructionist movement, founding of the college. He was a brilliant guy, and because he was not a systematic thinker. So, and he had this long career, so that makes it sometimes a little challenging to like pin him down. And he'll sometimes say contradictory things if you look at quotes from Kaplan over like the length of his lengthy career. But he he could kind of hold different contradictory inspirations at the same time, and so he can be challenging to sum up. But we're gonna kind of do our best to lift up a couple of key elements of Kaplan today. So he grew up in this Orthodox world of like a Lithuanian persuasion, not like Hasidic Orthodox. But as a young man, he encountered biblical criticism, like the idea that the Bible is not the received, word that was spoken to Moses on Sinai and then kind of handed and just faithfully written down by Moses primarily. That the Bible, the Torah and the Bible, certainly the Torah is multiple voices, constructed over time, which is, of course, has been the kind of scholarly consensus for the nature of the Bible for over 100 years. And so he encountered that as a young man. He kind of began to doubt the literal truth of the claims of Jewish tradition, that God literally spoke to human beings, and that those words were recorded, that God rewards and punishes us in this life or in the world to come, in the afterlife. A number of these kind of core tenets of traditional Judaism began to come into doubt for him, and he was, really straddling. He had come to the U.S. at I forget what age, fairly young age. So maybe he's like 12 or something. I could look. I forget exactly. But so he's primarily growing up in the US, not Europe. And, he's surrounded by all these other immigrant Jews who are going to universities or starting to go to universities, who are encountering early 20th century science and rational thought and so forth. And that all is both for him and the Jews around him that he's trying to serve or be in relationship with. There's a lot of coming into conflict with traditional Jewish ideas. And so he's trying to deal with that for himself. And so he really begins to depart from this idea, you could say, as God as some kind of like capital P person who's controlling the world, and starting to think of God more as a force or a process within the universe. We're gonna go much more into that. A favorite quote of his is, he said, a Jew should have a theology in which I'm just going to use his traditional, masculine language, that he believes with all of his heart, soul, and mind. Right? He was trying to figure that out for himself. He really believed in, and he wanted others to do that, not to necessarily become Kaplanian or Reconstructionist, but he wanted people to not mentally compromise themselves when it came to their thinking about Judaism and God and the Torah and so forth, and not to, turn themselves into pretzels to reconcile certain traditional ideas, and to have integrity. And so this led him to do a lot of, things like make drastic liturgical changes, like removing chosenness from the liturgy, that caused him to get a lot of flack, to say the least, from the more traditional Jewish world.
Can you repeat that quote that you said?
He said, a Jew should have a theology in which he believes with all his heart, soul, and mind.
So
right? That it should really, that and that's part of what we're trying to construct in what we're doing, or at least in a provisional way, maybe not in a final way, but to whether it's for so many of us, it's a piecing together of different elements and things from the tradition, things we feel internally. It's not like it's a process. So that's like a tiny bit of background before we jump into our main text.
He was 9 when he came over to New York.
He was 9. Okay, right. So he was young. So he mostly, and he really came of age then more in I think it was in Manhattan. They were so if there's not like burning questions on that little bit of things I just said, like should we jump into the meat of things here? So let's, hopefully everyone can read this as is from PDF. So we'll start with this, the gray text. So this text, this comes from this book, which if you become a member of OSE, pretty much while Daria and I were here, you would have gotten this book as a new member. If you didn't, let me or Matt Baker know, and we'll get you one. It's a really wonderful book. It's called Exploring Judaism, a Reconstructionist Approach, by Rabbi Jacob Staub and Rabbi Rebecca Alpert. They're both Reconstructionist rabbis. Jacob was one of my teachers at the college. And so what we're going to read from is, they have chapter, I don't know, 3 or 4 is called God. Chapter 3 is God. So they just, so they jump right in. And we too are going to jump right in. And And we'll go slow with this. You know, they're trying to write this. You guys are the exact target audience for this book. You know, they're really. I mean, this book is. I think this edition is. I think it's now 25 years. Yes, 2000. But you know, classical Reconstructionist. There's not like there's been dramatic developments in classical Reconstructionist theology in 25 years. So this is all pretty still very true. And so we'll go slow with reading this. We're not trying to get through all of, don't be too overwhelmed by, I gave you more than we'll get through. But it's really, whatever we don't get through, I'd really commend to you to look at on your own or reread what we do get through. Cause I think it's very thoughtful, you know, hopefully you'll find significant chunks at least that speak to you and maybe some parts that don't, but I think it's all very generative and well put together. So we're gonna jump to this this you feel like you're back in a sociology seminar where it says functional reinterpretation, right? Don't be put off by that. It's gonna, well, it will make sense if not in the first paragraph. Some in the first paragraph and certainly by the next couple of paragraphs. So would someone, it could even be someone on Zoom, if you wanted to read this first paragraph on page 27, and yeah, we'll kind of, you know, just be. Basically, my plan here for most of this is reading through this together, talking about it, trying to make sense of it, seeing how it relates to us, asking questions, clarifying it. So don't be shy about asking questions. Anyone want to start us? Tiana's going to start us off. Okay.
Functional reinterpretation. To understand Kaplan's discussion of God, we need to understand the method he used to reinterpret the tradition. He did not believe that a contemporary Jew is absolutely free to attribute new meanings to traditional concepts and rituals. Rather, he argued that it is our task to understand and empathize with the components of our tradition, so that we can determine how beliefs function for our ancestors in their own terms.
Right. That's the you know, how did things function? That's why it's called the functional reinterpretation. How did, and that'll become clearer in the next paragraph, but putting this idea out there, you know, how did they work? How did these beliefs, you know, what did they do for, in a way you could say, like, what did they do for what did they do for us? What did they do for our ancestors, these different beliefs?
Okay, so once that is accomplished, authentic reinterpretation would express in our terms the functional equivalence of what Jews in the past had expressed in their own idioms. For example, if the retelling of the Exodus story at the Pesach Seder served as a device to liberate Jews and to have them confront the meaning of freedom, then it is authentic for us today to discuss the meaning of freedom at the Seder. Keep going.
Sure, yeah, why don't you?
In case of God belief, Kaplan asserted that traditional conceptions of God had served Jews in the past by guiding them to salvation. By salvation, he meant that those things for which people ultimately search to find holiness, meaning, and peace, to bring about the betterment of the world. In the traditional conception, God's Torah guides the individual to sought-after goals in this world and the next. Through God's redemption of the people of Israel, the world will become a better place. In Kaplan's functional reinterpretation, God becomes the power that makes for salvation.
Right, that's another, you might have probably heard that, maybe heard, who's heard that before as a Reconstructionist, you know, line, bumper sticker, God is the power that makes for salvation. Oh, this is another one of our, you know, like quotes of sorts. It's probably Kaplan's most famous, but certainly by in no means his only way of talking about God or the divine, but this is probably the most famous one. So, but keep going and finish.
Kaplan identified God with the powers that help people find salvation. He emphasized the ways that God should function in people's lives. His main goal was to foster Judaism as the vehicle through which Jewish people work to achieve the goal of salvation.
Right.
So his definition of salvation again was what? By salvation, he meant those things for which people ultimately search to find holiness, meaning, and peace in life. To bring about the betterment of the world. That is, having been a Jew, having that I am a Jew by choice, salvation is so fraught with so many other meanings.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard, yeah, which is one of probably the reasons it maybe hasn't caught on throughout the entire Jewish world yet. But yes, it is important to do what you're doing with like clarifying, well, what does he mean by it?
Mhm.
So like what he is meaning by God is that power that enables us to find peace, meaning, holiness, working to bringing about the betterment, the greater development of wholeness in the world. So other initial reactions to that, or how does that? I have another Kaplan salvation quote that I'll share with you in a minute. But this is a sort of a foundational Reconstructionist theological element.
Well, certainly in the majority religion of the United States, that would be not a definition of salvation. And excuse me, as a matter of fact, I'd say that definition is perhaps a rejection of the salvation belief of the Christians and perhaps Muslims too. It's one that certainly would not confuse people by saying salvation is something which happens in the afterlife.
Right. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the afterlife.
Right.
Yeah, or
Exactly.
belief or your acceptance of
Yeah.
Christ as that he died for your sins or something
and-
like that,
and-
obviously.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that, that's so ingrained in people of.
It's
Yeah.
true, but yeah, I mean, he's not really trying to speak to those.
Yeah, you're
People,
exactly
no,
right.
yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
No, go ahead.
and folks online, if pretty much you have to unmute and just talk. If I can't really monitor, it's hard for me to monitor the room and like hands being raised. So just if you want to jump in or ask a question or clarification or comment, just unmute and interrupt us or at a good point. But
How
sure.
this compare, I guess, to the Orthodox Judaism or just even conservative? Because when I hear salvation, I also think of the traditional Christian interpretation.
So as much as it, so I guess if you're able to salvation, i.e., that makes for the for the creation of peace, meaning holiness. If you're able to just
See that.
fill in, mentally,
Mhm.
it's a little bit of I don't know, sort of legwork or something, but it's kind of what we have to do to kind of give, to flesh that out,
Mhm.
to sort of give it its due in terms of like what he's trying to help us think about and get at.
Okay.
But it was your question more like how would this
How would this compare to the orthodox or the more traditional or conservative path of Judaism.
Yeah, I guess you could just say in the sense of like. In a shortened format. With a bunch of caveats, but just to give a down and dirty, like, quick thing of like, God as a all-powerful being, or which is often anthropomorphic, or as, a person with a capital P who, does, directs things, or meets out reward and punishment and so forth. And so he's, trying to then locate God as a power within life, within life, although in another maybe we'll just jump to this actually, because this is a less well-known Kaplan quote, but since I'm mentioning this, if you go to this number 5 on this sheet. So here he says, but it starts to give you a little, it actually, and it's relevant to your question because it gives a little bit of sense of how he's like parrying or the tradition, the traditional belief, right? So he's saying when for example, we're told that God is living, right, which we see in the Siddur many times, right? El Chai V'Kayam, it will say. We should not take that to mean that God is a being who possesses the attributes of life, right? That would be a more conventional, most traditional, theological, Jewish theological, God is a being who, the supreme being or whatever, who's alive, but and does these rewarding and punishing and seeing our thoughts and actions and so forth. But instead of that, that God shares with other living beings, but that he, again, his traditional male language, male-centric language, but that he is life itself. And so this is a little bit more radical, not completely actually without precedent in Jewish tradition, but that God and life are one and the same. So this is from a different book that he wrote, that Kaplan wrote, called Questions Jews Ask, that I actually personally really love this line because I connect with this as well. So God is life itself. So that's a little different from like what he's saying earlier. His more famous thing about the power that makes for salvation is kind of like within life itself, like we can tap into God as that power that helps us to actualize peace, to actualize meaning, to bring about, to develop as human beings. Another synonym for salvation actually that some people will use is self-actualization, but he doesn't mean it just as, but self and societal actualization, because that was one of the cool things about Kaplan is, and I think why he liked salvation, because it's not just about an individual, but it's about the repair and the growth and the full flourishing and development of all peoples, of the whole world. Right, and so when we are, and we don't have time. We're gonna get next into predicate theology, which also sounds a little like, jargony, but it'll be clear, I hope, when we get into it, where it's like, as like things that are that a focus on bringing godliness into the world. So instead of the God possessing the attributes of justice, kindness, and compassion, that it's human responsibility to bring these are godly attributes, but and we're trying to bring those into the world. And maybe that's probably not helping things become more clear, but it'll be easier when we see it in the context of their writing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to stick on the salvation thing a little longer, but, let's see, what am I trying to say here? So, my question was more along the lines of what Sharon was saying. What is the Talmudic or the rabbinical definition of salvation, and does that mirror Kaplan's? And then I thought also, so that was really what does his definition come from, because I like his definition,
Yeah.
but does it come from that?
Yeah,
That,
that's-
you know,
Yeah, nice.
because clearly the human, what is the human like not anthropomorphized, but because of what's happened in other religions with the word Yeshua, which means salvation in Jesus, it's become like this whole human morphification of that word, but I want to understand what it meant to
Yeah.
Jews before all that.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right about the Hebrew word, which I'm pretty sure is the primary Hebrew word he's thinking of, Yeshua, which Yeshua is, which is then the word Jesus in Hebrew. But Yeshua in Hebrew, which you see actually all over the place in the Psalms and the Siddur, really just means help, aid. I mean, it's often translated as salvation as well, but it kind of like when we say it means help or aid. So in a way, which I think is so he's kind of dramatically
Yeah.
expanding on that of like God as the power that helps for the aid in human development, essentially, human like individual and societal development and flourishing.
Yeah, and Sheffa Gold in her Oziv Zimratia, she says it's song and strength, which is more along that line,
Yeah,
right?
Well-
Oziv Zimratia.
yeah, strength is not usually what one would translate Yeshua as.
No, as
but
Oziv.
yeah.
Right?
Right, I think then, and then she translates it like it has
The
been for
song.
me a, transformation. I'll sometimes also translate Yeshua as transformation, like that helps that, and that actually goes back into, for those of us who've been in this class the whole time, what we were learning with Moses in the burning bush of like, the Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, that sort of process of becoming, right? It was not a static, fixed thing. It was like, right, and that is part of what Kaplan is trying to do here in this definition, these ideas is move us away from a kind of a staticky, fixed, all-powerful being, but the power or sometimes process as well. Maybe let's look at this one other salvation quote from him. That's the first one, and see what that adds. And we won't stay on the because I think they pivot from salvation directly a little bit to some other elements of his theology. But would someone read the first quote on that? So now we're on the Mordechai Kaplan on God sheet for those of us who are online, the separate one. So this is the first quote, number one. Would somebody else read that?
God is the power that makes for salvation, is not intended to be rational explanation,
To be irrational.
a rational explanation of what we mean by God. It is meant to be a rational method of indicating where to look for that inexpressible, indescribable, and incomprehensible mystery we name God. All that it is intended to do is to have us realize that we should not look for that mystery in the astronomical or physical conception of the universe, nor to miracles which are only myths, but to that striving in man by which, when he is at his best, he aims to transcend or metamorphose himself. That is the striving for salvation.
Great, yeah, so there's a few things that this is adding, well, I don't know, maybe I'll ask you guys first, what is this adding or complexifying or?
I think he's saying salvation is not a thing, it's a feeling, it's something that's out there.
Well, yeah, and he's saying it's really just like a kind of pointer of sorts, it's to help us realize where we should look.
Like a conception.
Well, yes, but it's to help us to where we should not, where we should look, and meaning we should not look for one, first of all, he's recognizing this kind of more traditional idea that like there's a whole level of God that is inexpressible, indescribable, and incomprehensible, right? And that would actually be a point of agreement with him and pretty much all of traditional Jewish theology, right? So he's not denying that there's like that level, but he's trying to give some people something to work with that is not just kind of the more scientific, which is what he means by astronomical or physical conception of the universe, right? It's not just that, it's beyond just the sort of scientific rendering. And it's not to look to miracles, right? And so I mean, that's another huge break with him, certainly coming from an Orthodox background. And this is certainly in his day, the miracles in the Torah are meant to be understood like not as metaphors, not as like Jungian myths. They're like to be understood as like these were God's hand, intervening into history. They were supernatural, right? So that's another core piece of that. Actually, we're gonna, in the next section, the transnaturalism section of our book, that then became a major piece of Kaplan and Reconstructionism's emphasis was a non-supernaturalistic Judaism, right? And that was a break with Orthodoxy.
Right. This is Susan. I just
Yeah.
also want to say, it helped me in this paragraph when I was trying to understand it. The phrase, when he is at his best, he aims to transcend or metamorphose. So it's sort of that, Judaism doesn't really talk about like being perfect, you know what I'm saying? And the way that some religions do, but this does say like that strive, like we are really always trying to be better. Like who doesn't want to live a better or more ethical or more moral or more righteous life? Like, and so that phrase helped me kind of conceptualize this a little bit, I'll say.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for lifting that up. I think that's very helpful. Seeing some other head nods here. Yeah, that's great. Yes, and again, to go back to the functional reinterpretation, right? It's like, so this is how does the belief in God function? Well, it functions, right? This is his core interest, or a core interest, is it functions to help us to tap into those powers within and beyond ourselves, because he would say it's also beyond ourselves, that help us metamorphose and transform. And this, another traditional Jewish word that's really that is floating around here as well is teshuvah, really, because that's what teshuvah, that's another whole level of the meaning of teshuvah. I think we mentioned that before in this class, but right, this core word of the high holiday season that literally means turning, but is repair of our actions, repentance, returning to God. It has so many growth. It has a lot of it's one of these Jewish words that is very complicated to unpack, but that's also going on here as well. And Susan, the way she articulated that's getting added as well. Okay. So
Thanks for unpacking that. whole
Yeah, right, you know,
salvation thing. I feel much better about it now.
yeah, I mean, I really like, you know, I'm not a, you know, a straightforward, you know, there's some elements of Kaplan I love and some elements I don't. I guess for me personally, um, I think that this is an important element of what we can mean by God, and when and in prayer is that we're really calling upon, um, you know, not an all-powerful person being that's going to intervene to help us or fix us or you know, buy us a Mercedes Benz in Janis Joplin's felicitous phrase. But we're calling upon that power that enables us as individuals and as a Jewish collective, as a community, as a society, as a world community to grow and develop and to help us help, right? That's the like that
Right.
to help and to provide that and to help us. You know, it doesn't like give it all over. It's like it's a partnership actually, which is also actually a traditional rabbinic idea. You know, it was an important question to be there. This text notes how some of these ideas fit with traditional rabbinic partnership theology, which I don't think we've really named that before. But there's a number of like kind of ways in which these ideas, Kaplan's ideas, Reconstructionist ideas, connect with traditional Jewish ideas and like,
So,
you know, separate or differentiate. Yeah, yeah. Let's keep going if we're up, if there's, you know, are we up for reading a little more here?
Which paper?
We'll, back on our gray one. from-
I was looking at number 2 on that other page. We'll talk about that for a second.
No, okay, oh, why don't you read it?
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, this is another whole, this was like a quote that yeah, this is a lesser kind of known. Although actually, this also gives, this
Yeah,
is
that's right.
another case where he's, yeah, so why don't you read it, yeah.
People generally assume that God or divinity was a being of infinite power and goodness, meting out rewards to those who obeyed his commands and punishment to those who disobeyed them. The truth is that divinity is not a being in the same sense that a man is a being. Divinity is being or existence itself.
And why did you want, what was, why did you want us to read that, or what was it about that you?
So if divinity is being or existence itself, and man is being, is man God?
Or no, so he's saying that divinity is not a being in the
Not
same
a
sense
being,
that
but it's
man is
being.
a being. Like we're an individual being, right?
But we are being, we exist, so is God, are we God?
Well, I don't know what Kaplan would say exactly, because like this is kind of like lifted out of a book. And I haven't read the whole article that he's coming from. So I can't entirely speak to Kaplan, but I'm gonna actually, this is an important theological touch point for me, and actually Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism as well, that I'm gonna talk about in 2 weeks. And so it's really interesting that Kaplan also said this, and when he's saying divinity is being or existence, this is bringing us back to our first biblical theology. Well, did people remember, how is this bringing us back to what we talked about in the first the first two study classes where we had the burning bush text and so forth? Anyone remember? So it's in the divine, it's in God's name itself.
And well, I was gonna say Havaya, but it's the same. So he means it in the context of Yud Hey Vav Hey or Havaya.
And how,
Being, to be. In the camp sense, boldly be.
right, yeah, let's leave camp out of it and just
But
like,
yeah,
camp's a
but-
kind of a late camp comer to like, to this whole, there's the, the previous 4,000 years of Jewish theology. But,
But the being.
yes,
Yeah.
the Yud Hey Vav Hey, right, that we read that long quote, because the first, because the burning bush is the only point in the whole Tanakh where the Tanakh itself gives us a sense of what the meaning of Yud Hey Vav Hey is. It just uses these letters, but it doesn't make it clear, like, there's no direct connection to the meaning of these letters except in that place, because it's from this word meaning to be.
I am.
And right, that we, that could be I am that I am, I will be what I will be in the Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh. But this Yud Hey Vav Hey in general is this, we'll say it's like an impossible conjugation of the verb to be, because it includes present, future, and past all in those 4 letters, which is like mind-boggling, and it's meant to be. Like it's kind of
Oh, say that
Cool.
again at the tenses. It's meant to be 4 tenses in one?
it's well, it sure seems to be. I mean, I haven't, that it contains it, like we say, so the yud is the future, and the hey vav hey,
Yeah. No.
well, is really like
Present.
obey, which is present,
Present.
and I guess, past as, you could add haya, hey, yud, hey is also there essentially, just not quite in the order. But it's from this root word of being. So when he's saying that divinity is being or existence itself, again, this is a whole kind of thing to go down that isn't very classically Reconstructionist, so I don't wanna, I'm gonna return to it in 2 weeks, I think. But I found it fascinating that Kaplan is kind of acknowledging this or saying this himself. So you get a sense of like, he didn't just like pick one simple definition and stick with it and just repeat it over and over again. Yeah, right.
Yeah, didn't you say something about it meaning maybe the present moment as the all-inclusive now, future, past, present, everything,
Yeah,
and life at all moments, I guess, I'm not sure.
yeah, you could, yeah, exactly, that's kind of,
That the 4th tense.
Well, or
There's
all-
the 3 tenses, but
Yeah,
In
past,
addition.
present, future.
what is the 4th tense?
that's what he's saying.
Oh,
that
is that
it's
like
not
a thing
all
that people
inclusive.
talk about, or did you just
No.
making that up? Or,
No, that it's the all inclusive.
okay, I mean, and we say it in Odon Olam, the hu haya, the hu hope, the hu yihye, the tifara, like, it's the hu haya, hu hope, the hu yihye, that's all there in that name. But Okay,
It's highly mystical.
yeah, so Kaplan had a certain kind, right, so this is a little more mystical, so he kind of had a bit of a more mystical element as well. Actually, the third quote that I'll let you read on your own, we're not gonna read that, because I do want you to kind of get into what this next section, because the predicate theology thing is an important, helpful piece, that comes in our next section, so we're,
I have a quick question.
okay, yeah.
Not a question, it's almost, I don't know. Even though it says goodness in the beginning, to me, this seemed a little bit tyrannical. You know, he metes out rewards to those who obey his commands and punishments for those who disobey them, and this
Yeah, welcome to
comes-
traditional Judaism, sweetheart. I mean, like, no offense, but I mean, that's a straight reading of the Bible. Like, I mean, that's pretty much what it says. And a lot of like from people, traditional people may like, well, you know, I don't understand it that way. Or some of them may just say like, yeah, that's the way it is. But that is like, that is totally there in the tradition. I mean,
And it's from this chapter called The Unsolved Problem of Evil.
no, his characterization of God as a being of infinite power and goodness, you know, meting out rewards to those who obey his commands and punishments to those who disobey them, that's straight classical, biblical and rabbinic theology that he came to no longer be able to accept in a traditional sense. I mean, so it's not, it's not, I mean, I was being a little flip, but I mean, it sounded like you were saying, taking issue with that characterization.
No, I'm not
Or-
taking issue with it, it's just that it sounds. Like you said, it's, you know, if you're bad, you're gonna be punished hard, and. That doesn't always happen, really.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's why we're not a like ultra orthodox community.
Right.
I mean, if you really believed in that, you probably would want to be part of an ultra orthodox community.
So he was probably really attacked after this statement.
No, I mean. No, I mean, he was, no, I don't, well, I mean, I don't, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this was an article in the Reconstructionists, so I don't know that many traditional people were, he had already been excommunicated like 20 years earlier by orthodoxy by other Orthodox rabbis for other things he did. But yeah, I mean, so, but also what you're bringing up is what he's struggling with. We have an authoritarian tradition. Traditional Judaism, particularly, you know, through the Bible and even the rabbis, it's an authoritarian tradition, and that Kaplan knew wouldn't work for most of the American Jews that he was engaging with starting in the you know, the 30s and 40s and beyond in America. Like, we don't, you know, tell people in America what to do. They usually get a little ornery, right? And we're a democracy, right? Like, you know, and so he couldn't theologically accept that, and this is also why in terms of practice in halakha, Reconstructionist Judaism, we're not authoritarian. Like, the rabbi doesn't just tell you all what to decide religious policy. Right, so this is an example of where the theological idea extends into the practicalities of how do you construct a Jewish community. Like, Reconstructionists wanted to construct a Jewish community based on the principle of egalitarianism and democracy. And that's, you know, one of our great hallmarks of how we roll as a movement, as a community.
Just a quick question. I mean, the Holocaust turned Judaism upside down.
Yeah.
And how much
Quick
of
question
that?
about the Holocaust.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I don't know, this is quick.
I'm sorry, but I was wondering about, you know, was this these thoughts come after the Holocaust, or was this something that he was beginning to think about way before?
The short answer is I don't know, and I haven't, so this is quoted, I haven't read this article, The Unresolved Problem of Evil. What I had read a lot of is the book that it's quoted from, which is in the first quote called The Radical American Judaism of Mordecai M. Kaplan, which is by Mel Scult, who's kind of who's still alive, by the way, amazing guy, Kaplan's primary biographer. So I don't know, so Scult just kind of pulled that into his book, so I don't, but I would guess he's probably, yeah, I would look that article up. I mean, you may be able to find, I don't know enough about Kaplan and kind of how he thought about the Holocaust and so forth. But I would think probably that because he would not be believing in an interventionist God, that, and as we'll kind of see if we ever are able to get to the next section, there's this, like, that humans can kind of, we choose to sort of let God in, as it were, like whether we act justly and morally, and then that allows godliness to flow into the world through compassion and peace and justice, or conversely, through how we act, we can, sort of drive godliness out of the world, I think would be a classical Reconstructionist way of saying it. Okay. Let's go a little further, yeah. We'll get some more stuff out there. Cause this will probably be. Yeah, probably we won't get past this section. So, okay, so transnaturalism. Someone else read, starting in that next paragraph? You could read a few paragraphs. Page 28 in the gray, where it says transnaturalism.
Okay. Kaplan believed that the divine works through nature and human beings. He neither identified God with things in the world, natural, nor did he consider God to be beyond or detached from the world, supernatural. Therefore, Kaplan's theology came to be called transnational.
Transnatural.
Transnatural. Yeah, there you go. Transnationally transnatural. In this view, there is more to the universe than the sum of its parts. In the organic interrelationship of all of its processes, there are divine powers that truly exist apart from the empirically verifiable phenomena of nature. They are manifest, for example, in human self-consciousness. It takes faith in God to believe that the world is structured in a way that gives significance to the human quest for salvation. A transnaturalist, however, believes...
So you can kind of just see how, right, what we are reading now is building a bit on what we just read, right? That there are these, divine, what they're calling kind of divine powers that that enable salvation and give, that's part of the human quest and the striving and so forth that Susan was lifting up. But go ahead, yeah.
A transnaturalist, however, believes that God works through us rather than upon us.
Oh, so that's another nice bumper sticker. I think the movement even uses that one in our current Reconstructing Judaism website, right? It's a nice, right? It's like, because he's trying to, he's trying to get people to shift their thinking, because he wants, because obviously then and now, back in his day and in ours, lots of Jews, when they confront the Siddur or the Torah and they just read the translation, are like, yeah, and kind of walk away from it. And so was trying to give people a way of reimagining God and and this is a nice, bumper stickery way that he did it, to shift from the traditional belief of like, God acting upon us, instead seeing as a transnaturalist that God works through us as human, as a human community.
Thus, our sense of responsibility to bring divinity into the world is sustained by the faith that there is a power at the source of human endeavors. In more recent years, one of Kaplan's students, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, has developed a new means of expressing transnaturalistic belief that he calls predicate theology. In grammatical terms, he suggests that we refer to God not as a subject, but as a predicate. This linguistic change liberates us to think about God in new ways. Using Schulweis's terminology, we would say that it is more important, for example, to believe that justice, kindness, and compassion are godly, rather than God is a person possessing the attributes of justice, kindness, and compassion. This is another way of expressing the importance of human responsibility to bring godliness into the world. This does not necessarily involve changing the traditional language of prayer, but rather the way we understand that language. For example, we refer in our prayers to God as the one who frees the captive. We express our hope in this way that the divine forces that create freedom on both the political and personal levels will be effective. We also affirm our commitment to making those forces manifest, both through political action and through our will to survive.
To thrive.
And transcend our limitations. We believe that these forces are manifestations of the godliness that pervades creation.
Okay, yes, that's a thank you. Got a lovely reading.
Wow, I was thinking that too. NPR.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we all did something in our prior lives.
Were you, anyway, sorry, I don't want
Yeah.
to further derail this, but, yeah, so this is a dense, paragraph, but, so maybe let's start to, try to put this in our own language, or like what, like how would you express what predicate theology is versus like subject theology in like a non-jargony way, but
Everybody can have a part in it, it's not like placing everything on God's shoulders, but on everyone that's participating in it can be godlike and to be the best person that they would be.
yeah, I think that's a nice, that everyone can have everyone is playing a part of it, that's like in the middle, the importance of human responsibility to bring, godliness into the world, that these attributes are godly, instead of like God is the being that possesses the attributes.
I know you said not to be jargony, but to me, it sounds like a decentralization of it a bit. And maybe that's not going to work for any like Orthodox people probably, because centralization is important, but that we are part and parcel of the godliness.
Yeah, that we are, that's kind
That's what
of
I'm
like
saying.
decentralizing it from like
From
the God
God to
being,
just
yeah.
being vehicles of it or vessels of it, and we are part of the godliness.
Yeah.
That we can actively participate in the attributes which we attribute to God as I think I've gotten lost here. Wait.
There's the
No, there's the attributes that like that are traditionally kind of attributed to God, that when we, bring them about, we can say like godliness has
Yeah,
acted,
right,
um,
right.
there, um. And then he gives the example of like this, you can be saying the same blessing of God as the one who frees the captive, or, or you could even say like, like when you say Baruch Atah Hashem, Ga'al Yisrael, who redeems Israel, right? That we're the trans naturalist, the kind of reimagining this is, expressing our hope or affirming the powers that create freedom on personal political levels, that those will be manifest, through us and in the greater world that we're participating in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, this is just again reflecting on the conversation. I don't know that I would have thought of it the first time I read this. It basically kind of, even if you did want to believe more literally in some of the rabbinic theology about God fixing everything, this basically says, but really that just can't happen unless we do something. Like you just can't, you can't just rely on God to fix everything. And so there has to be like this through our will to thrive and transcend our limitations. Kind of resonates to me, like you can pray and kind of hope that God is going to intervene, which I don't really believe in miracles, but occasionally I might lapse into that. But really, it's us that has to make the difference. And through prayer,
Right.
maybe you realize how to do that, or you get inspiration, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, like that we are the ones who allow godliness to be expressed, through into the world, or not expressed, by how we act.
So the first paragraph with the 2 paragraphs on page 30 talk about that exactly.
Yeah, maybe that, the next paragraph, we'll skip that second paragraph on 29, where it's a nice kind of connecting this back to Maimonides, the famous medieval philosopher, but let's skip that. And yes, do you want to read those next 2
Sure.
paragraphs? So now we're on 30, we're jumping to the next page.
A transnaturalistic faith also answers one of the most troubling questions human beings have ever asked. If God is the force behind everything and controls all events, why do the innocent suffer? Another of Kaplan's students, Rabbi Harold Kushner, has given a contemporary transnaturalist's response to this question in his popular work, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. The answer is that the question itself is based on a faulty assumption. God is neither all-powerful nor present everywhere. Rather, as the 19th century Hasidic master Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzky teaches, God dwells where we let God in. God is only manifest in the world where and when we ourselves approach salvation. God is not a person who rewards and punishes us like a parent. The innocent may suffer because we have not worked hard enough to end the suffering of the earth's creatures, or because random things occur over which neither we nor God have any control. Some ills, like war and famine, are subject to our redeeming efforts. Others, like critical illness and natural disasters, can at best be ameliorated. When we can assist those in need or comfort those in pain, God is working through us. When we cannot, it may be said that we experience God's presence in our sorrow.
Do you want to say a little more of how that
I
kind
just
of
thought
helped
that,
tie things together more for you?
I think this was just, when we talk about whether God is a being or not, I think this is putting the responsibility, I mean, God is there to guide us through. And no train of thought there.
Yeah, or to guide us, like,
Like, yeah,
but that we're
yeah.
kind of the ones who
Right.
like bring
Right,
it
God
about
dwells
in a
where we
way.
let God in.
Yeah,
So if we believe and we, then we can make things happen, with God guiding us.
and us, and I guess, I mean, you maybe also say it's kind of more classical Reconstructionist formulation, like that. Or guiding us, or that that we tap into those godly powers, like it's that's kind of, I think, the predicate piece, just to like activating the godly powers instead of like the subject piece is like God as the being is acting, and like the predicate piece is like we're acting the godly powers. There's another cool.
Yeah, we can't sit back and expect God to do it for us.
And 4 over here talks about the predicate too.
Yeah, maybe we'll throw this other one into the mix. And then kind of step back a little bit here. So this is also from Mel Scult's book, but it's on this another further expression of the predicate theology idea. Someone new want to read this one? Yeah, Carol.
Is this 3 or 4?
Number 4, so now we're back on the Mordecai Kaplan on God sheet.
I didn't see Scott's name there.
It-
Predicate theology suggests that instead of talking of God as subject, we talk about God as predicate. Subject theology presents a supreme being, God, who is loving, merciful, and just, whereas predicate theology considers the qualities of love, mercy, and justice to be fundamentally divine. Subject theology, as traditional theology is sometimes called, involves an inherent distortion. It considers a subject to be the actor or the cause, while for Kaplan, we are referring to a process that is underway. We have noted elsewhere Kaplan's provocative phrase to thingify as a way of characterizing our tendency to see subjects where we should see processes. Emerson called it the tyranny of nouns. Kaplan illustrated this by reference to the process of burning and the expression fire burns.
Yeah, I can go on to the next page. He explains what it means by that.
By the time we have learned that there is.
By this time,
we've learned that there is no independent entity or substance called fire. The predicate burns names the process which takes place when we see fire. Likewise, when we say God loves, forgives.
that should be acts. Acts judge justly. Yeah.
X?
ACTS. Yeah.
Oh, X.
Likewise, when we say God loves, forgives, acts justly, we should understand it to mean that the process of loving, forgiving, and acting justly are divine or God. Perhaps that is what Spinoza understood by the statement, God is, namely that the process of being as such is synonymous with God.
Right. So. Right. It's the burns. So the love. So it's like focusing on the so in the predicate. I don't know if this is like super obvious to everyone, but like God loves, right? Loves is the predicate. So it's like, we're focusing on that instead of the subject, like fire burns. But on the one hand, so it's focusing on the loving, the forgiving, the just acting justly. That those are all divine, or those are all like expressions of, maybe even you'd say it's like the divine being or something. And then there's this whole, like, that's all kind of I think, just clarifying what we've talked about before, but then this quote is kind of also adding in this thing about process, which is also an important piece. Anyone want to put that, or did that strike anyone, or is it, you want to try to put that in your own words, like what's he saying about the whole process and the thingify thing, and like how is that, what's going on with that here? I'm not bending everyone's minds too much, but
That maybe the process is creating, of doing righteous things, is creating tikkun olam, and is becoming some type of metaphysical embodiment of God and the godliness.
Okay, any other takes on it?
I guess. I'm thinking of kind of a personal experience. When you act in a way that is, let's say, a godly attribute, it feels like it expresses freedom. And what I mean is that doing something like a demonstration against an unjust law that feels like you're removing a beam or something that is suppressing or holding down. And it gives, I don't know, a sense of freedom. I worked on civil rights law, and when we would get a win, it would feel like not only were we doing something that is removing an oppression, but it would feel a sense of accomplishment that not only made you feel good, but the fact that you participated in perhaps freedom for others. And this, I worked in fair housing law, and it was, I also felt like it was like, for me, something I had to do. And it's not something I prepared for, but where I grew up, it was defining for me in Mississippi. So, and then I went on and made pretty much a career in in a roundabout way too.
Yeah. And is there a way that you would or could sort of express that idea in this, what we're talking about with the predicate theology? Like, how would you kind of apply that in this example that you're thinking for yourself?
Well, like I saw something which was unjust, and later, I began with the civil rights marches, and in the South, freedom riders and things like that, and I met people that were not like the people I grew up with, and it was.
But let me push you a little, like, because I think there's something there. I'm just wanting to see, can you make the connection to,
Well,
like, if you were gonna put that into the theological language that we're playing around with and trying on here, how would you do that?
It was like, I will go back to some of my learning in theology. It was going from a cosmological view of God to an ontological view of God, something within. And the fact that
Uh-huh.
I was motivated to participate in these injustices that I saw around.
Yeah, so that you're enabling kind of a
Right.
godly,
Right.
process or.
And
to-
I
to-
saw that this is something
express.
that I needed to do. And I might add that my father said, get a real job. I ended up running fair housing agencies in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we were able to file the first legal the first action against the practice of redlining. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court and we won. So, and that felt like it was, it was like, something that I had participated in, and I was 29 years old, and is my life over?
Does,
Yeah.
does what we're learning help you give a kind of a different or new spiritual language around what you did, would you say, or?
Well, I was going through a transformation at the same time too, because with my view of God that I grew up with certainly did not work for me.
Right, no, but I'm trying to connect it, Brian, with like what we're talking about, like, and just trying to push you to, maybe it's too much, but do you know what I'm saying, like, cause it seems like what we're learning and talking about with the predicate theology piece spoke to you, catalyzed this experience, and I'm wondering if you can, having expressed what that experience was, if you can then, I don't wanna take too much time, but like a lot more time with this, but if you can then. If there's something about the predicate theology language or like the bringing forth the godliness piece that fits with that experience or that helps you conceptualize your experience more. That makes sense.
I would say that the at least the Jewish view of God that I got in my studies coming into the faith was that it's a much more activist God. You can't sit there and talk about doing good and doing helping others without doing that, without being active. I said, I grew up where there was a lot of hate, and it was preached from the pulpit. It was everywhere. It was the way you were supposed to be. And
I can kind of compare it for me as becoming president of OSEG. So prior to that, I was a wonderful volunteer, but everything was about me. It was, I came first and, I was a great volunteer. I knew I was a great volunteer. And then when I became president, I had to totally change my outlook on what I was doing and what I was saying. And, and look at as what was just for everyone, not what was good for me. And it's really, I've totally grown immensely in that respect, but that's how I compare the subject to the predicate theology, and that the meaning of what I was doing totally changed. It was no longer about me, it was about everyone else.
Yeah, well, or although, another way of that you could think about it from what we've been talking about is like you were able to include like a greater sense of salvation,
Absolutely.
right? Like not so like obviously it includes the personal, but then you're able to really take that larger view that expands that sense of salvation and the good of the whole of the larger picture to really keep that in mind. Yeah, is another way of languaging it from what we've been talking about. Yeah, thank you. I, so I wanna, any last other, I wanna give us some time for the reflection piece cause I think we've thrown out a lot of different things and you've read a number of different, terse or, packed, quotes and texts. And so I wanna give you some space to reflect on that and see what is, lingering. Any last kinds of connections that this is making with your own life and experiences that you think others would benefit from hearing with these? Let's just see, we just had that was a pretty long exchange we just had. I just wanted to see if there's anyone else. And probably will send us into reflection if not. I
guess I have a reflection
yeah.
on it. I was, prior to being in, like, doing Doctor of Public Health stuff, I was in the international development world. And I did a lot of work, where people usually got into it for one or two reasons, or maybe three reasons. Either they were adrenaline junkies, or they wanted to help people, or they just wanted to, find their own spirituality. It's like, that's what I found, is that it was one of those three things usually. And the people who wanted to find their own spirituality through the work they were doing, in refugee camps or in war zones or in anything like that, they were pushing the limits of what was possible to do that. And I think that that's how it connects to this being godly and being part of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what came up for me when I was listening to it.
That they were like that doing
That
those
by
kinds of
doing-
actions,
yeah,
it was a kind of,
was as
it
a-
was this sort of godliness in action
Right.
and fed their own sense of their spiritual.
For about a third of the people, yeah, I would say
yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, I think, part of some of the theological underpinnings of the larger Reconstructionist focus on social justice too, that we have as a movement that I haven't really seen people super explicitly expressing that, but I think that comes out of some of these Kaplanian ideas of both the idea of salvation and human flourishing, but also that these, enacting justice and peace are, how our godliness flowing into the world and partnering with God and so forth, and a core element of how of how classical Reconstructionism understands God. Okay, so with our remaining little bit of time, so 7 minutes, so I just invite you to kind of sit and reflect for a moment. See what is stirring. Probably start with yourself, but then you could also go back and look at what we've looked at, if there are particular, if you could find one line or two lines from what we read, that was resonant or interesting, or you'd like to sit with or think more with, what would those lines be? And really invite you to, hopefully you have a journal or something you can write down on to retain this, but also if there's, something that was particularly challenging about your own theology from what we read, that might also be fruitful to write down and reflect on. There you have it.
That's right. Paper cut out of him.
Oh, I put it together.
See him look like him.
Oh my gosh.
Who's a paper cut out.
Oh, that's so funny.
No, he's family, he's my grandmother's cousin.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Val does know him, we'll do this for him.
Yeah.
This was at the Reconstructionist convention. but
I just, Shelley, I wanna just give, I wanna give us time
That's
to.
funny.
to-
It looks like
to-
you're sitting
For
there.
people to reflect to, but. Just want us to end on time, so people can feel free if you wanna keep writing after we're done, so keep these, papers, hopefully you have kind of like a, folder of all of our things, and then we'll probably have you bring them back all for Rabbi Daria's session as like, as you work on writing some of your own theology. So we'll meet again in 2 weeks. And these are really, I please do try to read the rest of this in particular. I think the next, I would have loved to keep reading it with you, because, the next section is, they thoughtfully raise like some of the critiques of transnaturalism, like that it's kind of overly rationalistic and kind of cold, and And there's a really nice section about like, well, what is the place of, on 32, 33 of like, what about mitzvot? Like, why do we do mitzvot if they're not, if there's not like a commander God, right? And then right after that, there's a short couple paragraphs about worship and prayer, about prayer. And then there's a really important section on myth and metaphor, which Kaplan didn't have, I think, the greatest appreciation for, but you know, later Reconstructionists did, and that's another whole, you know, sometimes we can affirm the mythic power of certain theological traditional ideas in Judaism from the Torah, and so, you know, that the sea, the Red Sea being split is a classical example, like not as a literal event, but as a powerful metaphorical mythic idea. And so like Kaplan Siddur, his first one in the 40s, removed the reference to the splitting of the Red Sea because of like its miraculous quality, but then the Reconstructionist Siddur that we have that came out in the 90s put it back in because you realize, okay, wait, there's actually like, even if we don't take it literally, there's a power here. So there's, I think, some thoughtful things about that. And again, if you do have the book, the blue book, it's there in the full, you know, you can read the whole rest of the chapter and the other stuff in there.
Do you have copies of the blue book here?
I have copies. I don't know that I can just, you're a new member, right?
Yeah, 40 years.
I just sent Matt, Rabbi, I just sent Matt Baker a note about the book, and I just said, you know, if you're still not because we didn't get it either when we rejoined 2 years ago. I'm happy to buy it, but we just,
2 years ago.
but we need to know what book it is.
Okay, Stacy.
No,
Um,
And Tiana, you didn't get it.
but it was just last year, so.
Oh, then I'm
Yeah.
not joining.
Yeah, okay.
Me too, but.
Um,
I'll buy it. I just need to know the book.
yeah, yeah, there'll be a whole run on them in our office, but hopefully the people who've joined in recent years, Matt could get them to you. They are available, I think there are copies on Amazon. You want the 2000 edition as opposed to the 1985 edition. Or you could see if you can buy it or something, Bella. I don't
Yeah.
think we can.
That's fine. I'm happy to buy it through whatever, but
Yeah,
I just want to make sure I get the right one. Thank you.
yeah. Okay, Yasher Koach, everyone.
So on
Thank
June
you.
5th is the next time?
June 5th, I believe is the next time. Yes, 2 weeks. Yes, 2 weeks.
Whose
Yes.
birthday is it?
Mine.
It's my child's birthday.
Okay, Sophia, hope you're healing up well.
Yeah.
Kudos to you for being on post surgery. We'll look forward to seeing you in person soon.